One of my favorite things about working with polymer clay is the fact that we can pre-bake it and literally bake in our steps so that we don't mess things up further on down the line. In today's project, we're going to make an octagonal box that I think would be pretty much impossible without pre-baking. Hi there, Sandy here with another polymer clay project, this time using supplies from the Blessings CreateAlong Box. So of course, our project starts with polymer clay. Any color you want. This time it's going to be rolled out on the thickest setting of your pasta machine, about 2.5 millimeters thick. The first thing you're going to do is cut 2 hexagons. This is part of the set that comes in the Blessings box, and if you need to, you can use an acrylic block to help you get a nice cut. And you just want to cut these on a tile. Now leave the extra clay in place while we do this next step. We want to smooth out this square in the middle. You can do it on both of them. You only need to do it on one. This is going to be the bottom of our box. Notice I'm rubbing from the outside in because if I push out, I may distort my shape, and I definitely want to keep this a nice perfect octagon. That's also why we're leaving the extra clay out here for a moment, just to keep it from getting out of shape. You can get a piece of paper and rub, then remove the excess clay and leave it on the tile just like this. So now I have some more of my clay rolled out, and I am going to put a release on it. I like to use Armor All, and I like to spray just a little. That's probably way too much, but just a little. And I like to spray it on my clay sheet. Whenever I'm using a detailed texture, having the release on my clay sheet means that every tiny little bit and crevice is going to have release on it. So this is the bamboo deco disc set that comes in your Blessings box, and I'm going to cut 4 squares just about that size. We're going to need 4 squares for this octagonal box, so you can decide which one of these designs you like best and use it twice. Put the textured side of one of your deco discs to the side with the release of the clay, and then start pressing from the center out. And take your time and make sure that you have an impression all over the entire piece. Now this part here is going to be the inside of your box, and if you don't want it to be lumpy, bumpy, and fingerprinty, take a piece of paper, use your acrylic roller to just roll that smooth. Now you can use the edge of the deco disc to trim away any excess clay. And now comes the kind of tricky part, is getting this off without distorting it. I find just gentle thumb actions starting it, and you might end up getting a little stretching on this first end. That's not too bad. It's a little distorted. What you can do is flip your deco discs over, texture side up, and kind of use them to just nudge it back into shape. And you'll repeat that step for all 4 of these squares. Then before you bake, just to make your design pop, you can add some mica powder. As I mentioned, the back side of these textured squares is going to be the inside of your box. So you want to bake them on a piece of paper, but you also want to put them on a tile just to make sure that they stay flat. Then you're going to bake 4 of your textured tiles, just like this one, plus your 2 hexagons that have not been moved off of the tile you cut them on. Bake them at the manufacturer's recommended temperature for 45 minutes. Once they're done baking, you can release your hexagons from the tile, and if you need to, you can kind of clean up any edges from this base one, because this will be the base of your box. But this one is actually going to be a spacer. You'll also have 4 pieces like these. Now what we need to do is cut these into strips that are the right size to make the sides of our box. On this box, I left them the height of the deco discs, but for my other box, I'm going to cut them all to the same size because they were slightly different because of the stretching. If you are using this octagonal cutter, then you will need to cut your strips 18 millimeters wide, which is a smidge over 3/4 of an inch, but 18 millimeters is perfect. Before you do this marking, if you want these directional designs to go a certain way, be sure that you pay attention to that when you do your markings. My favorite tool for this kind of job is one of these little quilting rulers. I have these rulers in all sizes and configurations. What I love about them is they're marked down to 1/8 of an inch, and on this 1/2 inch, and they're marked in 1/16. And you get all of these parallel and perpendicular lines, so you can get things just so. I've decided that I want my box to be 1.5 inches tall, or I want the strips that make this part of the box 1.5 inches tall. So I'm going to use a ultra fine point Sharpie and mark here, and then mark right at 1.5 inches. And now, because I have those perpendicular lines, you can line them up. You can see through it and know that if you're cockeyed or askew. So I just love that. So I've got that perfectly lined up on the 1.5 inches over on the other side. And let's see, am I going the right way? I am. Notice I failed on this one. and I was written it down to tell you and everything, and then I cut it, and but you know, it looks okay. It's fine. At this point, I am going to switch to a ruler that has millimeters, because this is just precisely 18 millimeters, and it's so much easier to do that than fractions of an inch. So we're going to mark this at 18 and 36. We're going to get 2 strips out of each of our tiles. That will be 8 for our 8-sided box. And then repeat on this side, marking at 18 and 3.6. You can see I've already done all that on this one. If we were to try to cut these pieces as they are right now, baked, it would be very difficult to get a precise cut. So I have a really cool trick for you that you can use in lots of things, and that is to use a heat gun to warm up the clay. This is just a heat gun that's often used with scrapbooking, embossing powders. So let it warm up for a few seconds and then hold it about 3 inches above the clay for 15 to 20 seconds. When you're done heating it, it should be warm and floppy, like this, as opposed to this one, which is a little bit stiffer. So while it's still warm, you can take your clay blade, lay it right on those lines. What I like to do is kind of sneak up on it, and then stand the blade upright, push straight down onto a tile. I think I should have warmed that up a little bit more. It would have cut more cleanly. So if it cools off too much, just warm it up some more. See how easily that went through and it was nice and warm. Here's another important tip for you. Before you go any further with your piece, use a little rubbing alcohol to remove the Sharpie. Do it now. Don't know how well you can see on this piece those marks in there. I thought I'd be able to remove it after I had assembled it and baked it again, and I baked those marks right in there. They are not coming off. At this point, you should have 8 identical strips that are 18 millimeters wide and whatever height you want your box to be, and your 2 octagonal pieces. Now there's one more thing we need to do before we could start building our box, and that is to put something in there as a temporary support for this piece. For this box, what I used was just wooden dowel. It needs to be something that can go in the oven. And then I stuck this other piece on top. So you can see how this was a support for building these walls. So they were supported at the bottom by the bottom one, and then at the top. And then after baking, you might have to use a tool and pop it out. So wood, glass, ceramic, something kind of cylindrical that will fit in there, that can go in the oven. If you don't have a wooden dowel, You might have a wine cork hanging around. You could use that, and then you can cut it down to whatever height you need. It needs to be maybe a little bit shorter than the height of your pieces. You need to adhere this temporarily to these pieces. The best thing I found are some glue dots. You can find these at the craft store, often in the scrapbooking section. The glue holds fine while you're working on it, and then after baking, it kind of just falls apart, so you can easily remove it. I like to leave this piece without the square in the middle so I can easily keep track of which is the top and which is the bottom. You won't have quite as much surface contact, so I'm going to put like 3 dots here just to make sure. And then you want it lined up so that your flat faces are in alignment, so you just place those on your table. Place 2 flat faces right on your table and bring them together. You can turn it to each face and make sure they're lined up. You can shift it a little while you're building. Now we can start building our box. And to hold these in place temporarily on the bottom, I am going to use super glue. If you have Polybonder glue, that's fantastic. Normally I don't use super glue in something I'm going to bake again because the super glue lets go in the heat of the oven. But in this case, this is not going to be the only thing holding these in place. So I just put a little bead of glue along one base, and I'm going to put this on a piece of paper just to protect my surface from super glue. So that goes on there. And I've got my piece, and I'm going to just kind of stand it up, and it's just touching this one. So you can see how useful having this piece here is. And I think that's not quite lined up. I'll just scooch it over a little. So some kind of instant drying glue. Polybonder is great because it survives the heat of the oven. But if you don't have it, the super glue will work. Because like I said, I'll show you we're going to use other things to hold it in place. I had to stop for a moment there. A couple things. First of all, I needed to lay out my design so that they're spread the way I want them around my box. And I also need to shorten my cork. And I've started doing that just with my blade. It will cut right through it. Just take your time and work your way around, and you can cut through a cork with your clay blade. I would probably not use your nice, super sharp clay blade. Use kind of a junky old clay blade. This was just a little too tall, and so I wasn't making good contact with these sides. So let's try that again. And now we have that there, so that should help. Oh, much better. So it's a little lower. You can see now this is a little bit lower than the top edge, so it'll be able to lean on that nicely. So now that I have my design planned and my spacer at the correct height, I will carry on and glue all these pieces around. Here's my little box with all of the sides glued on. Remember that it's only glued at the bottom. Don't glue it at the top. I'm going to set this aside and let the super glue completely cure. And we'll work on this trim that we have on our little box. So this spiral trim will hide those seams. And then these strips around the top and bottom will help hold it together. I have some clay that I've rolled out on a number 4 setting on my pasta machine, which is about 1.5 millimeters thick. You need it to be at least 6.5 inches long in order to go all the way around the box. For our decorative pieces here, you need 4 strips about the same width as it is thick. So you want pretty much a square cross section. If you have a 1.5 millimeter square die, you could extrude it, but it doesn't have to be precise. This can be about 6 inches wide, so your clay blade is actually a really good guide here. So we're just going to cut these little strips to about 1.5 millimeters wide. And we need 4 of these. We should have enough out of that. So for your decorative trim, take one of your strips and just hold one end to the tile and start twisting the other. It may pop off the tile. And try to have it even. If like here's a thicker part, you can just grasp it right there and just twist that part. And then once you have it ready, go ahead and just squish the other end down. And as it sits, it'll settle into that shape, but when you first do it, it tends to want to uncurl. That's why we're squishing the ends down to the tile. And then do this 4 times. And do them all at once so that you can get them all pretty much the same twistiness. Once you have these all twisted, just leave them to sit on the tile for a few minutes, like 5 or 10 minutes. Then when you cut them into pieces, they won't untwist on you. While your twists are resting, you can use a ruler. Again, I love these quilting rulers to cut 2 strips about 6.5, 7 inches long, or long enough to go around your box. And I'm making them a strong 1/8 inch wide. And you can see why I love these rulers, because they have all these little marks that you can just line up. So I'm basically lining up the outside of that 1/8 inch mark. Make it whatever width you want. That's just what I thought looked good in the proportions of this box. Now you can start adding your twisty strips. You'll just need a small brush and some liquid clay, and you're going to paint the liquid clay right on the cut edges of your sides. You can wipe off the excess that gets on your side. Pick up one of your twisty strips and place it in there. You should be able to get 2 of these lengths from each of your strips. And then just trim it like a scant 1/8. So just a little bit shorter than the thickness of whatever you're deciding to put around your edges, so that these cut ends will be covered when we add the top and bottom trim. And carry on adding that all the way around. Just being careful that you hold it by either 2 opposite sides or by the top and bottom, so that you don't squish anything. Okay, so all of those decorative trims have been added, and now we need to add the top and bottom strips. You want to add liquid clay to the back side of both of these strips, and you want to make sure it's completely covered. You don't need a thick layer, but you need it completely covered, because what we're attaching it to has so much surface texture. You don't have that many points of contact. So you want to make sure that anywhere it does contact, there is also liquid clay there. Now that I've got liquid clay all along this, I'm going to cut one edge nice and square. Make sure it will release from my surface so I don't stretch it. And then decide if there's one side that you prefer to be the back. And then just start at one of your edges and apply this all the way around. Trying to keep it straight so it's flush with the base, and sort of tap it onto that texture on each side. And just take your time with this. Here we go. 8 sides. Trim the other end to meet. And then gently and delicately, you can use the sculpting tool or your fingers to try to smooth that. Sometimes just repeated very small strokes with your finger. I'm putting very light pressure on here. Go back and forth. Do that enough, and that will smooth it pretty well. Try to make sure these are fairly straight, not too wobbly. Then repeat at the top, being careful not to get any liquid clay up here. Mine, when I added it, was right at the edge, and some of it ended up getting liquid clay on it and being stuck, and so I don't have a perfectly neat surface up in here. Once you get the top edge on, now you can bake it at the manufacturer's recommended temperature for another 45 minutes. Here's my little box out of the oven. Now we can just pop this off. A craft knife helps just to kind of get in there and get you some leverage. And that should come out. The other one came out more easily. It just came right out. Let's try this. So I don't wreck my blade. There we go. Boy, now these glue dots are holding well. They didn't hold so well. There we go. And there's the cork. And you might have to use some Goo Gone or something just to get that residue from the bottom. So there's your box. You can certainly leave it like this, but I'm going to add a little bit more. If it bugs you being able to see daylight through those sides, you can roll little tiny logs of your clay, add some liquid clay, and just put them in there. You'd want to make them smaller than this and then smooth them on neatly to finish the inside of your box if you want. I'm not going to. What I am going to do is add some trim to the top. So here's some more of my gold clay. I'll just use a block to roll that out to around 1/8 of an inch in diameter. And this is going to go on the top of my box. So find your back, because that will be where all your seams go. And add liquid clay to this top edge. I've got liquid clay all the way up here. And by the way, just another caution, when you're building your box, just pay attention before you put it in the oven. I don't know where this chunk of clay came from, but it ended up on the inside and cured on there. And it'd take some doing to clean that off. I'm not going to do it now. But just kind of pay attention to those things so that your finishing details are nice. Now for an octagon, the angle to connect them all is pretty easy. It's just a 45-degree angle, which you should be familiar with. So it's not anything too funky. We'll cut our log at a 45, start it on the back with all the other seams, and then just place this around. And what you can do to get these corners a little more crisp is just pinch on either side of the corner with your index fingers and thumbs, and then gently push. It's just the slightest of movements, but it really gives you a much more sharp corner. Just push. There you go. And do that all the way around. Cut that one close. And then we'll finish with another 45-degree angle. Make those blend as best you can. Now this just looks like a rope stuck on top. To make it look like this one, like it actually belongs on there, get yourself a piece of paper. I love this deli paper. It comes pre-cut into these sheets. I actually even used it this summer for its intended purpose, which is to separate hamburger patties so you can freeze them. And I was like, oh, I have some of that. I've never used it for food before. But we're going to use it today on our polymer. Just put this over the top and start gently smoothing your edges down. And this will really stick it to the top, which will help reinforce it and make it strong so it all holds together. And kind of flatten your top evenly. And then you can come in, and if they've gotten a little bowed, you can straighten them out. And my seam here is not very good, so I'll work on that. And then because this was an awful lot of gold up here at the top, on this one you can see I added just some of my mica powder to it. It's not going to stick to the baked gold clay, so it'll just give you a little bit of differentiation. What did you notice? I failed on this one too, and cut one of the panels of bamboo going the other way. Oh well. Remember when you're opening these, threads up, and then you don't dump mica powder all over the table, hopefully. Another thing I've found when adding this mica powder is it really helps you to kind of further smooth and shape it. Just gentle strokes with your finger and you can round it and shape it. Fix it wherever you need to and make it nice and neat and tidy. One final step you can do is add a footed base to your vessel, like I did here. I have a sheet rolled out here on a number 2 setting, which is maybe just over 2 millimeters. Add liquid clay to your base. Don't add too much or it'll ooze out and just make a mess. Just a nice, thin, even coating. Place that down. This is the tricky part. I've failed this twice, is putting this on so you have a little bit showing on all 8 edges. So actually roll out your clay maybe a little bigger than you think you're going to need it. Now you can trim whatever size lip you want. So again, but I'm going to do the same trick we've done in cutting several other pieces. I've got my blade kind of at an angle so I can clearly see the amount, and then tip it up and cut straight down. And I wouldn't use a tool to do this. It's just going to be cumbersome. I would just use your eyes and judge it. And if you're uncertain, cut it a little bigger than you think you need, because you can always go back and cut off more. And if you mess it up completely, which I've done, you can just roll all this clay back up in a ball, sheet it out again, and try a second time or a third. So that, I think, adds a lot to it. And if you want, I've come back on this one and added a second one afterwards, thinner, which I think is kind of fancy. One final thing is, if you want to add a lid to your piece, you can. You don't have to. So this fits in here perfectly, we know. If you're going to add a lid, make sure when you do this rim that you make sure it's not sticking out over, so otherwise this won't fit in there. But then you just take this piece on a piece of paper. In fact, I'm going to grab another piece. It's got pasta machine ripples. That's just what it does at a higher setting. So this is rolled out on a number 2, about 2 millimeters. And just take your roller and kind of rub over it, burnish out those ripples. It looks much more finished that way, rather than leaving them in. So now this should be nice and smooth. The other side will be your top. You can put this on with some liquid clay. If you want, if you know you're going to be doing that from the beginning, then you could smooth this piece in like we did the base. And then use your blade to cut probably a bigger margin, however wide you want your lid to stick out. Of course, you'd put liquid clay in there. I just haven't. And then you'll have a lid that fits perfectly. And maybe you'd want to use one of the other cutters from the set to make a little piece that goes on top to decorate it. Maybe stick a bead in there as a little pull. Thanks again to CreateAlong for sending me their Blessings box to play with. I really love these bamboo textures and can see using them on all kinds of things. Once again, this is Sandy Huntress wishing you happy creating.